Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, look, there's a lot of concern globally about what this Italian election can mean for the EU. Global markets have just gone through a period of volatility. Is this an election that the world should be worried about?
Probably yes is the answer, because people tend to forget that we're talking about the third largest economy in the Eurozone, the eighth largest economy globally. Italy, after all, is one of the founding and leading countries of important international organizations such as the G7, the G20, the OECD, the EU, and so forth. So, given these conditions, a country that, as we call it, is a giant with paper feet, usually worries its friends and allies. It does.
Now, let's go through some of the candidates and the parties. On the right, we've got a kind of a right-wing populism led by the Lega Nord, and even the most popular party is a populist party in the Cinque Stelle or Five Star movement. And on the right or centre-right and centre-left, you've got two former prime ministers in Silvio Berlusconi and Matteo Renzi. First off, let's talk about the Five Star Party, because I think a lot of people wouldn't know about it necessarily in Australia, but it is the most popular by the latest polls.
It is. The Five Star movement was founded by comedian Beppe Grillo, and it's now led by 31-year-old Luigi Di Maio. And it's a populist-born movement that is now turned institutional. It's predicted to have between 27 and 30% of national votes, and even though that is not enough to form a majority government, which is what our constitution requires, we are talking about a political movement that is one of the few that has made it, one of the few of its kind to have made it. So even though it will probably not have a majority in the Italian parliament, because let's not forget, Italy is a parliamentary republic, Luigi Di Maio, the current leader, has already said that yes, they will be able to talk with other parties on specific agreements. So it's kept the door open for cooperations.
But not a coalition to form a broader government.
Not a coalition to form a broader government, and this was the promise that they've made to their own electorate. So this might mean that political instability will follow, even though they might want to focus on key specific areas. However, even the Five Star movement is not immune from internal problems, because they still have somewhat blurred policies when it comes to immigration, seaborne immigration, national economy, relations with the EU, and foreign policy too. So most of their policies are very superficial from an analytic perspective, and so this is the main critique that has been moved to them.
Now, we have to talk about Silvio Berlusconi, of course, one of the most famous Italian prime ministers of the last century. Can Silvio be prime minister again with the return of Forza Italia?
He cannot. He's banned from public office until 2019, and yet, despite all of this, he's made an important comeback as the veteran, as the reliable politician. And in part, that is true, because the fact of the current situation proves us that he's been able to polarize the whole of the right wing under his own wing. And the right wing is actually leading the polls. They have between 36 and 38% of national votes, just short of the 40% that it's required to form a majority government in Italy. So they do have strong polls backing them up, and they have Tajani, the current president of the European Parliament, as the likely prime minister.
So we're in an ironic position, perhaps, where the Silvio Berlusconi-led party is seen as possibly one of the most stable of the candidate parties.
Yes, that is the case, and that is has been one of the best effort that they've made from a communication point of view, of course, because they used to blame what Silvio Berlusconi called the red threat communists back 15, 20 years ago, and now they are using the threat of the Five Star movements, the incompetence sitting in power, as the main threat.
Now, let's talk about the centre-left. The former Prime Minister, Matteo Renzi, can he return as Prime Minister after this, despite resigning last year, or will it be does Paolo Gentiloni have a chance of forming a government himself?
It is quite unlikely that former Prime Minister Matteo Renzi will become Prime Minister again in these elections. Yes, he did resign after the loss in the national referendum to reform the constitution, a bold attempt that failed, however. And we have also to confirm the fact that voters are almost escaping from the party. They are now polled at between 22 and 24%. In 2014, they were at 40%. So this is something that should be taken into account comprehensively. Paolo Gentiloni is the current Prime Minister of Italy, and he's the one that is able to gather more attention even from other parties. But at this stage, because he still is the current Prime Minister of the country, he cannot go on television very often. He cannot release so many interviews as the other candidates do, and this is impairing his own campaign, of course.
Okay, now let's talk quickly about Lega Nord and some of the far right. Matteo Salvini has really taken the Lega Nord from a northern-focused party to a general Italian kind of anti-immigration, kind of new right kind of party. What is the likelihood of their electoral success, and what does that mean in this Eurosceptic environment for Italy?
Well, first of all, you're right, Leo. It used to be called Lega Nord, so the Northern League, and now the Northern bit has been dropped from the name, so it's now just called the Lega, the League. It's aiming to be a national party, a far-right, xenophobic national party. And whatever the outcomes of the election is going to be, the Northern League, or the League as it's now known, will be celebrating, because they used to have between 8 and 10% of the national votes. They have between 13 and 15. So they will be celebrating, there is no doubt about that. The key issue here is whether we are going to see a government that is stable enough to steer, to bring along and to govern a country that is, as we just said, a country with a very large economy, very important political and diplomatic networks, strong armed forces and so forth, but extreme political instability.
And what, I know it's hard to say, but ahead of the weekend vote, what do you see as the most likely outcome, and what do you see as being the best outcome for economic stability for Italy, given it's just dropped off its GDP growth again? There's concerns about EU. What is the best outcome for Italy and the European market generally?
Well, I don't know if it's the best outcome for Italy at all. That is, of course, a personal opinion, but there is another option that we haven't discussed yet, and that is the possibility of another grand coalition government, where the majority of the left wing and parts of the right wing, the moderate right wing, basically Berlusconi, come together and decide to form a government whose only aim is to produce a new electoral law that will bring a country to snap elections, basically, a few months after that. This is not an unlikely option, we have to say, and if we add to this all of what we've just said, it is hard not to foresee more political instability for the country in the next few months. We shall see in the next few years.
Okay, Gabriele Abbondanza, thanks so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.